We'll begin our forum with opening statements from the candidates in response to the following question. At the heart of Catholic social teaching is the idea of the common good. The common good is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. In your party's view, what are the most important issues that need to be addressed for the common good of Canadians today?
Thank you very much for the question. I just want to touch on the fact that Catholic social justice teachings really made me into the person I am today, who advocates for the marginalized and those who don't have a voice. So in terms of the most important issues to me and the NDP, I'm going to touch on three. So that would be housing, affordability, and climate change. The housing crisis is the main reason why I decided to enter this election as a candidate. Housing is a human right, and it's time that we start to create policies with housing every person in mind. Even Jesus' birth was affected by some sort of a housing shortage. It became a beautiful part of the story of the birth of Jesus, but it also highlights to me how people without housing can be put in extremely vulnerable situations. Over the past 6 years, the right kind of housing has become more difficult to secure for everyone. We must take care of people in encampments who are expressing their human right for housing, renters who are struggling to make ends meet each month, and those who are looking to purchase their first home, and those looking to move into a larger home to support starting a family. The ability to secure housing that works for a family has a direct effect on whether people choose to start a family. We must ensure that couples can secure housing that will support them starting a family and bringing new life into this world. We'll do that by removing corporate buyers from the market, supporting renters, and building 250,000 affordable homes within the next 5 years. You should, in my mind, only be bidding against other people who are looking for a roof over their head, and the NDP will work to ensure that. Along the lines of affordability, life has become harder and harder for ordinary Canadians to afford. Childcare, when you can get it, is prohibitively expensive, and internet and cell phone bills continue to go up year after year, and the costs of medicine are only going up. We must ensure that Canadians can afford to live in their home city or town, and focus on those who are struggling as we try to build back better and with equity after this pandemic. Affordable childcare needs to be in place immediately to ensure women can continue their careers today, not years from now. This is how we build back better with equity. On climate change, simply put, we don't have time. Our planet's climate is changing in dangerous ways, with forest fires now becoming the new norm in Canada, both in BC and Ontario. These fires are affecting air quality across our country to the point where exercising outside is not recommended on certain days. Canada's emissions have increased every year over the past 5 years. We simply aren't doing enough, and we're running out of time. The current government has bought a pipeline and is saying the revenue of that pipeline is necessary to fight climate change. The concept that we must pollute in order to combat climate change is utterly incompatible. We need to transition now to cleaner energy, net zero buildings, and do everything we can to fight the climate change crisis, because we simply don't have time. Thank you.
Question 1 is on life and dignity of the human person. Catholics believe that at the moment we are conceived, we have been made in the image and likeness of God. It is from this likeness that all of our dignity is derived. Each of us is an incomparable, irreplaceable, unique child of God, and as such, we are each imbued with an inherent and inviolable dignity. We increase this likeness and our own dignity throughout our whole lives by seeking to grow closer to God with each moment of our being. Thus, the dignity of all human life must be respected across the entirety of a person's natural life, from conception to youth, to adulthood and professional life, through to their elderly years and the end of their life. What are your party's views on the purpose and the dignity of human life, and how do those views shape your party's platform?
So the NDP has always been the party focused on the most marginalized in our society. Every life is important and should be supported, and supported so that it can truly reach its full potential. And this kind of lends itself very well to our approach on families. So there are things we can do to encourage people to start a family and feel supported while doing it, including improving perinatal health. So it is a struggle. New parents should not struggle alone. They should feel supported before and after birth. so that they can feel confident in the decisions that they're making and feel confident and able to start a family. Couples right now in Canada, many of them feel that they can't afford to start a family. We must address issues of affordability, housing, and head to toe medicine so that couples feel confident that they can move forward and create new life, and that there's a social safety net around them should they falter. On the topic of reproductive health, the New Democrats believe in respecting people's rights to make decisions about their own bodies and their own lives. Many individuals who are seeking abortion services in Canada can't access them. Only one hospital in six currently offers abortion services, and some provinces refuse to cover the cost of surgical abortion. Lack of access is even worse for people in rural areas in the north. We believe that everyone deserves safe, accessible abortion and reproductive healthcare services, no matter where they live or how much money they make. It's not enough for elected officials to say that they won't reopen the abortion debate. We need leaders to take action to prove access to services and support families.
Question 2 is on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. In recent months, Canadians have been dismayed at reports of the large numbers of unmarked graves on the sites of former residential schools, including schools operated by Catholic institutions. These findings have been particularly traumatic for Canada's Indigenous communities and peoples, who have long lived with the intergenerational trauma of their families' experiences at these institutions. In the wake of these findings, numerous churches in Canada have been vandalized or burned, including many that are home to Indigenous Catholics. These tragedies, heaped upon tragedies, remind us that the journey of reconciliation and justice is an arduous journey that requires contrition, action, and commitment. Canadian Catholics are committed to this journey. In the words of Archbishop Donald Boland to Catholics in the Archdiocese of Regina, may this be remembered as a time when we opened our eyes and our ears, when we acknowledged the sufferings of the past and responded to them with compassion, when we turned apologies into concrete initiatives and built relationships that would build a better future. How does your party propose to advance sincere, committed, and coordinated responses by all responsible institutions to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, with the good of Indigenous people in mind, and in particular, to address the many ongoing and unconscionable crises, such as elevated rates of suicide and substance abuse, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, a lack of proper drinking water, and the chronic underfunding of reserve schools?
As a Catholic school board trustee, this question weighs heavily on my mind. We must do everything that we can to move reconciliation forward as quickly as possible. And some of this includes basic respect. We had a school where in Ontario, we were asked to put our flags back up to full mast. And in residential school survivor reached out to me saying, this feels like a slap in the face. Can you bring them back down to half mast? So I worked to bring the flags back down to half mast to show respect to those navigating the terrible effects of the residential school system on them. As far as the NDP, in partnership with Indigenous people, a new Democrat government will fully implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. We will implement these immediately and without delay. We are far past the time to get this done, and the reconciliation and moving the TRC's Commission's 94 calls to action has not happened at a pace that I would call acceptable. We must move much quicker and in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have lived with the impact and legacy of colonialism for decades. The resilience in the face of genocide is why Indigenous people, language, and culture survive. Canadians are reckoning with the theft of children from families and land from Indigenous communities. New Democrats are committed to undertaking the important work of reconciliation in good faith and in true and equal partnership with Indigenous communities across the country. We believe that the Crown's relationship to Indigenous peoples must be based on an acknowledgement of our country's colonial history of genocide and stolen lands, and include legally binding commitments to fair and equitable redress going forward. We have commitments that reflect the Truth and Reconciliation Commitment's 94 calls to action, covering child welfare, education, language and culture, healthcare, justice, equity, housing, the environment, and access to fresh water for Indigenous communities. As part of reconciliation, it's fully acknowledging the horror and harm caused to Indigenous people, their families, and communities by the residential school system. These institutions systematically remove children from their families and inflicted abuse, sickness, and death. The recent revelations of thousands of mass and unmarked graves at residential school sites across the country underlines the depth and horror that this genocidal policy inflicted for more than 160 years. It's time to find every child and bring them home. A new democratic government will fully fund the search for graves at former residential schools, as well as the maintenance, commemoration, reburial, and protection of residential school cemeteries, according to the wishes of Indigenous families and survivors. We'll also work with nations and survivors to establish memorials to those lost to residential schools. Thank you.
Question 3 is on an economy at the service of people. In the words of Pope Francis, money is meant to serve, not rule. This statement puts simply the Catholic belief that our economy must be at the service of people, especially the most vulnerable and economically fragile among us, and not for the sake of accumulating wealth, particularly at the physical, emotional, and monetary expense of others. For many Canadians, particularly younger Canadians, a living wage and dignified work which supports a family and a dignified home are beyond reach. The result is that many are unjustly excluded from full participation in our society. What does your party propose to do to ensure that those most excluded in our economy have the opportunity to enjoy the great material prosperity of modern economic life? And how does your party propose to build an economy at the service of Canadians?
Yeah, so this is a particularly great question in context of the pandemic we just went through. The pandemic changed the way many of us had to work, and overnight, millions of jobs disappeared. So the NDP in the minority government worked with the government to bring in support. So we doubled the amount of the CERB payments so that people could survive as they worked towards rejoining the economy in a way that works for everyone. We also increased payroll benefits to cover 75% of a person's wage. So that was another thing the NDP fought for in this government. And when you elect NDP members, we will fight for you in Parliament. The growth of low-paid, insecure work, we need to do more to support gig workers. And make sure that short-term precarious work isn't really kind of where people find themselves when they rejoin the job market. We are working people, New Democrats are. For our whole history, we've fought for better working conditions and standards that lift everyone up. We know good jobs that treat people fairly make a real difference to Canadian families, and that setting up Canadians for success in the work world benefits us all. We know the federal government has an important role to play in making work better and fairer and more secure for everyone. We must do so much more to protect the health, safety, and rights of all workers in Canada. And the NDP have always supported and will continue to support workers coming together into unions so that they can build better conditions for themselves and a better life, and a life that pays a living wage for workers so that you can live and you can thrive in Canada. Thank you.
Question 4 is on care for God's creation. As Catholics, we believe that humanity's relationship with creation and the creatures of the earth is a sacred trust from God. Pope Francis has been clear that while we are meant to work with creation in serving with God as co-creators, the sinful exploitation of our natural world and resulting ecological crises like climate change threaten the existence of the human family. It seems too often that as a culture, we put our own immediate material wants before the well-being of others, including those in other parts of the world and all future generations. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue, says Pope Francis. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. How does your political party propose to achieve an ecologically sustainable future for Canada to protect the God-given dignity of coming generations and our fellow children of God around the world?
Yeah, so I'm inspired every day by Pope Francis's encyclical called Laudato Si on care for our common home. This talks about caring for our one planet and just caring about our brothers in it as they suffer through things like resource extraction without any sort of kind of supports and being taken advantage of. So I'm a firm believer in Laudato Si and its key messages. I've ensured that Pope Francis's vision for a world where we care for the planet and each other are ingrained in all the work we do at the Toronto Catholic District School Board, working towards Laudato Si schools with DevPeace, an excellent Catholic social justice organization. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have time when it comes to climate change. It is a crisis, and it is a crisis right now. Under the previous Liberal government, emissions continue to increase, and we find ourselves alone amongst the G7 countries in this dubious accomplishment. This government has bought a pipeline and states that revenues from the pipeline will help fight climate change. Pipelines are not how you fight climate change. The NDP will target getting down to 50% of 2005 emissions levels by 2030. We will do this by immediately stopping the Trans Mountain pipeline work and ending subsidies to oil and gas corporations. We will support a transition away from oil and gas for workers so that they can get hired to do clean energy jobs. We'll enshrine the right to a healthy environment in a Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights. We'll set a target to power Canada with net zero energy by 2030. We will ban single-use plastics the same way that we've done that at the Toronto Catholic District School Board. We'll aggressively move transit and active transportation projects forward to give people an alternative to driving a car and commuting to work. And we'll ensure that Indigenous people, as the original peoples and stewards of their territories, will ensure they have a seat at high-level decision-making tables to help direct Canada's efforts to confront the climate crisis. Thank you.
Question 5 is on rights, responsibilities, and participation in society. Catholic social teaching recognizes a wide range of rights inherently owed to every person in respect of their dignity as a child of God. The Church also teaches that human rights are indissolubly linked to human duties. In this way, working towards the common good of all is a responsibility for each and every one of us and every institution in Canadian society. In that spirit, how does your party propose to encourage and enable the great breadth of civil society in Canada to employ their time, talents, and treasure in the service of the common good and in full partnership with governments, business corporations, and cultural institutions in order to promote the full participation of every Canadian in our society?
On this question, I'm inspired by Pope Francis's latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, in which fraternity and social friendship are the ways that His Holiness indicates to build a better, more just and peaceful world with the contribution of all people and institutions towards that goal. I think as leaders, we must encourage behavior that recognizes the tenets behind Fratelli Tutti, from encouraging wealthy Canadians to pay their fair share to support society via a wealth tax on those who make 10 million or more, and ensuring that corporations that profit here return supports to ordinary Canadians. We are all in this together, and we can support the marginalized by the NDP plan to support the marginalized by introducing a wealth tax and ensuring that corporations who profit here pay their fair share. We must also address the root causes of unemployment and ensure that employment insurance supports people being able to afford to live, as well as get trained to contribute to society in a way that is meaningful to them. We must also address racism and hate as a society as well. Countering hate online is an important part of the NDP platform. We will also work to tackle systemic racism and its negative effects on minorities, ensuring that minorities have an equitable experience in Canadian society. We truly have to work with each and every institution in Canada to eliminate systemic racism that is unfortunately in every institution and in every system. That's why it's called systemic racism. Canadians must become more like the Good Samaritan to ensure that we all recover from this pandemic, and the NDP will support and encourage society to support each other. Thank you.
Question 6 is on solidarity. Solidarity is acceptance of the truth that because all people are part of the same human family, part of the one body of Christ, what happens to others affects us as well, regardless of differences in location or life circumstances. Solidarity is found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbor. The good of one is the good of all, and the other is as important as the self. Injustice done to another is an injustice that affects everyone, and Catholics stand in solidarity with the unique injustices and sufferings facing so many Canadians, whether our Indigenous communities, our poorest neighbours, immigrants and refugees escaping persecution abroad, those living in isolated communities, those living with the ongoing mental health and addictions consequences of the pandemic, and the young, including young families, and the extraordinary challenges to human dignity they all face. How does your party plan to concretely express solidarity in partnership with other social, economic, and cultural institutions with Canada's most vulnerable people?
So this takes me back again to Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti for inspiration. We truly must work together to support the marginalized here in Canada. Unfortunately, we've gone through decades of government cuts that have harmed the services we count on, and Canadians have been left struggling. They can't access healthcare, medication, mental health care, or home care that they or their loved ones need. Millions of Canadians are living in poverty and homelessness, and too many of them are living with disabilities, including seniors, veterans, and children. New Democrats believe that we all benefit when we live longer, healthier lives together, and we're committed to a future where we take better care of each other, so everyone benefits. We'll invest in healthcare and expand it to include pharmacare that covers everyone, and work towards expanding it even further, including dental care, vision care, and mental health care. We'll tackle homelessness, as housing is a human right. We'll fight poverty, and we'll work to make sure that everyone has access to healthy, affordable food. That starts in schools with a federal student nutrition program, because hungry students can't learn. We have to make sure that everyone has the basics of life so that they can move forward and thrive as part of society. We know we're stronger together, we do better together, and we can work together to make life better for everyone. Housing is a human right. People living in encampments are expressing that human right, and we must start building housing that works for them in partnership with them. And here I will acknowledge the church's excellent role in helping to support the homeless through their Out of the Cold programs and other programs. The NDP will support that great work by building 500,000 affordable homes, with 250,000 of them built within the next 5 years. We'll work with co-ops and land trusts so that we are building housing by the people and for the people. We'll support renters who pay more than 30% of their monthly income towards rent with a subsidy of up to $5,000, so that vulnerable renters don't fall through the cracks. We do want to also take action on the opioid emergency that is gripping all of Canada by ensuring that people have safe access to drugs in an environment where they can be supported and work towards recovery together.
Question 7 is on Canadian culture. The importance of local, regional, and national cultures cannot be overemphasized as means of balancing our senses of solidarity with desires for freedom of self-expression. Pope Francis has recently noted that while we are called to welcome the presence and positive influence among us of people from other cultures, the solution to our own local cultural problems is not to spurn the richness of our own cultures. Pope Francis writes, just as there can be no dialogue with other without a sense of our own identity, so there can be no openness between peoples except on the basis of love for one's own land, one's own people, one's own cultural roots. I cannot truly encounter another unless I stand on firm foundations, for it is on the basis of these that I can accept the gift the other brings, and in turn offer an authentic gift of my own. I can welcome others who are different and value the unique contribution they have to make, only if I am firmly rooted in my own people and culture. What do Canadian culture and identity mean to your party? Are all relevant voices in Canada invited to participate in shaping Canadian culture? And if not, how would your party propose to address the building of Canadian identity in conjunction with other governments and with other social, cultural, and economic institutions?
I believe that Canadians aspire to be part of a great country whose global contributions and local contributions they can be proud of. I think in order to achieve that and in order to move forward, we must first address the sins of our past. And we do that by advancing reconciliation with First Nations people as quickly as possible in partnership with them, and do everything in our power to eliminate systemic racism in our institutions. We must start to focus on leading with equity. We have to look at our tables and ask ourselves whose voices aren't at the table. That includes Indigenous people. That includes, making sure that our consultations are trauma-informed consultations, and we bring those most affected by our previous policies to the table to build policies that work better for them. Bringing our LGBTQ2S plus communities to the table as well, and ensure that we update the Employment Act to include things like gender identity and other sort of human rights that we find in other codes, but not necessarily in the Employment Act. And we have to move to end employment discrimination faced by members of the LGBTQ2S plus community. A new Democratic government will add sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression to the Employment Equity Act in order to address the disadvantages experienced by the LGBTQ2 plus communities, and particularly transgender people, to finding work. Another area that we can advance to really make Canada an equitable place we can all be proud of is addressing gender equity. Our communities and our country are stronger when women thrive. In Canada, it's still too common for women to experience discrimination and gender-based violence, particularly if they're members of a marginalized community. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has just made these things worse, and women need support. We want to build childcare back immediately so that the recovery is also a she-covery. We want to ensure that women can return to their careers and build back better with equity, but immediately. So we need to have those childcare spaces available right away so that we can rebuild our workforce in a way that is equitable from a gender perspective.
We're closing our forum now with closing statements from the candidates on the following question. What is most attractive for Catholics in voting for your party in this election?
The NDP, to me, is the party most aligned with the Catholic social justice teachings, which really have inspired me my entire life to advocate for the marginalized. The NDP has always been the party of the marginalized. Never has that focus been as important as it is now, as we work to ensure that Canadians don't slip through the cracks as we work to recover from this pandemic. As a school board trustee, every decision I made, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, who are we leaving behind with this decision? And this is how Parliament must make decisions going forward. We have to always have an eye on who we are leaving behind. And the NDP, I believe, are the party best positioned to lead with this sort of thinking. And this is actually how we have encouraged better decisions in Parliament through the minority government, with a focus on who we are leaving behind and ensuring that we don't leave them behind. As Pope Francis says, we are fratelli tutti, and we must work together to come out of this pandemic together as a society. We need to break our loaf of bread into millions of loaves of bread, and ensure that every Canadian has everything they need to survive and thrive as we work to build back better, and build back quickly and with equity as we work through this pandemic. The NDP is the only party with a platform that will take care of each and every person in this country and help us recover from the dual crises of affordability and climate change. I truly hope that the NDP and I can count on your support. Thank you.